Good evening, welcome to And It's Live, the history of the Premier League. This is the third part of our four-part look at 92-93, the inaugural season, of course. And as always, I, Martin Ramsey, in case you didn't know, are joined by my two friends, colleagues, and fellow time travellers. David, Edgar, how are we tonight?
Very excited. I have some Gary Pallister quotes to share, and surely we would all agree that anybody's day is made better by a few Gary Pallister quotes about the 92-93 season. So, no, very much looking forward to this pivotal, absolutely pivotal to what would go on for the next 5 years minimum.
Yeah, more than that. Adam Thornton will break down bits and pieces for us. How are we doing, my man?
Good, thank you. I was planning on being collar up for this one, but I didn't quite get. Thought that would have been fitting, but no, I didn't get around to it. So I am collarless for those of you who are watching our lovely faces.
I was planning on kicking someone.
It's a couple of years away.
It's a couple of years away, but look, everything we're doing on this show is just building to it. It's the greatest moment in Premier League history, and it'll never be surpassed.
We are, of course, alluding to where we finished last week, which, of course, Eric Cantona's signing for Manchester United from Leeds United in the middle of November. The middle of the last week in November. So we'll pick the story up with the final weekend in November. The 28th is the Saturday. Whitney Houston is powering her way to the top of the charts with I Will Always Love You. And if you went to the cinema, as people did in those days, before the cinema was killed by
was
too
it
many
very
films
much the style at the time?
Yes, it was. Before it was all full of films for adult children. You could see Patriot Games, Husbands and Wives, Sneakers, Last of the Mohicans, Peter's Friends, which I quite enjoyed, The Crying Game, wait for that one, and Sister Act is top of the box office. Anyway, that's 1992 outside of football stadia. This is, a fairly big weekend. Eric Cantona, David, looked on from the stands at Highbury, talked about United's indifferent form at the start of this season, I think it's fair to say. A fixture that would become so Barclays, so Premier League, so the pinnacle of everything for the first kind of 15 years. Not quite there yet, but United did win. They won 1-0, and it was another move in the right direction as they started to pick up a real head of steam throughout the winter of 92-93.
Yes, and I'll just get straight to those Gary Pallister quotes. What he said was they took the previous season into this season with them. And he said, if anything, we were trying far too hard at the start of that season. He said we had taken it in and we were a little bit worried. We were trying maybe too hard to right a wrong, and we missed out on putting pressure on our rivals early on. And he also remembered that Emlyn Hughes, Martin, for it was he, not a name I'm sure that will mean much to you, Adam, but an absolute household name at this point. Not just for his football career at this point, for his broadcast career, said this was Ferguson's last gamble, bringing in Eric Cantona. And Pallister said that they had a bit of a laugh about that because they knew that it wasn't a gamble. And he said Eric changed everything immediately. But this game, you're right when you say it will become a big thing, but it was still a big thing then. It's not so long since the 2 points deduction game. The infamous one, where, of course, Arsenal win the league that year and they'll chant because it became clear they were going to win the league really early. Liverpool collapsed. And the Arsenal fans were singing every week, you can stick your F word 2 points up your posterior to the FA. So it's not long from the shame game. And these games did have a bit of edge. The Emirates is a wonderful stadium. I think we've all been fortunate enough to go to it. And I think now it can be a cauldron on a big night, but there was something very special about Highbury, I think. I know it was small, but it was atmospheric, really atmospheric. And they seemed to be right on you. And this felt like a big one for United because, as we've mentioned on the show previous weeks, Arsenal were the favourites at the start of this season. They were a very well-respected unit. and they were streetwise as well. You didn't get past them. Even on an off day, they weren't easy to get past because obviously the defence. But they knew how to kill a game. One thing, though, that they were struggling with a little bit, Martin, was adapting to the pass-back rule. And I think that doesn't get much chat this season because it was almost like, well, there's this pass-back rule and you need to deal with it. But watch a game from Arsenal from, say, 1990 under George Graham or 91 when they won the title. If they need to shut down a game, they are passing the ball back to David Seaman a lot. But it's so jarring now after 30-odd years of not being allowed to do so. But you know the famous Graeme Souness pass back from the opposition box?
Yeah.
They were the masters of that. They knew how to do that. And I think they were struggling to adapt in a game. United are the opposite of this. United are looking to be the opposite of this. They're modern, they're dynamic. They've got these flying wingers on either side. They've got the midfield in place. And again, though, I always felt United in the 80s, Martin, even under Ferguson towards, they were very nice and on their day, you know that great phrase, on their day. But there was a niceness to them. There was an element, even pre-Cantona, in that United team. There were guys who knew how to look after themselves. So I think Ferguson was putting that steel in. And of course, we're Scottish. We had witnessed Ferguson's Aberdeen teams in the 80s who had some very skillful players as well, Eric Black and Peter Weir and whatnot, but they could look after themselves. And it took him a while to get that into the United team, but there's no better test of that than when you're coming up against an Arsenal side who are very skillful, but who are very aggressive. And it was a big win. And just it started to feel like things were moving for them. And Gary Pallister, as I said, says at that point, even in the dressing room, we began to think, yeah, this is it now. We're through that period. We've got him. We are going to go on and do something.
Adam, you're huge on the pass back stuff. Yeah,
I love it. Yeah,
I mean, one of the biggest. We'll come back to United in a minute, but one of the biggest problems, or teams that found a problem, was the champions as we started the season, Leeds United, who, despite the midfield they had, tended now and again to bypass that. They could be very direct. Get Lee Chapman and Cantona up front. It makes good sense. And John Lukic, bless him, he would have some. He was some moments in the air with the ball, just actually trying to catch it. But that with his feet, that was absolutely not his forte either. And some goalkeepers that season, it was as if they've just been asked to do a completely different job. They've turned up to their work and the computer system's all changed and they don't know the passwords. They don't know how to do anything. It was such a change in football from the get-go.
Yeah, I think obviously those of you who have listened to the main event show, we won't go into as much detail maybe as we did on that, because that was obviously a European-wide thing at the time. But I think Schmeichel is one I'd like to focus on maybe in the next season. I think there's a lot to get into here in terms of what we've got for the next couple of episodes. United's turnaround, Villa will come on to Nottingham Forest, but I think it'd be something once we get a season under our belts, it'd be really good to look at a few, because Schmeichel was one, wasn't he, this summer or the summer before here? Denmark used that quite a lot, that time delay. I think was it the it must have been the 1990 World Cup where Paki Bonner had, was it a record or something? It was like seven minutes or something he had.
Yeah.
The ball in the hands for, and that
it
was
6, I think, and the FIFA technical, and the FIFA they were looking at it anyway. It's not as if it came from that, but the technical report on, I think, Republic Island 0, Egypt 0, was that Bonner had the ball in his hands for 6 minutes at least, and it was like, right, enough. It's just we can't cope.
But they gave them 2 years, Martin, and you're right about Lukic and these guys. They knew it was coming, but it was almost like they just went, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Which is where British football is at this moment in time. With a lot of things. The three foreigners rule, for example, teams they had 3 years notice of that. They had 3 years where, Maradona was Italian, for example, because he was already in Serie A when that came into being. And, I guess it didn't affect English teams immediately because they didn't know when they'd be back in Europe. But we're so bad for all. We'll get to that when we come to it. Football's about today. Managers' jobs are about this season. So yeah,
that's fair.
I think there's an element of people don't want to be first in football, or the majority of people or teams probably don't want to be first. And I think we see this with the Guardiola clones, which all stems from this, as we know. But yeah, I think there's a little bit of that. It's underestimating it. I think not forward planning, which they don't really do. They do a lot better now, but back then probably not so much. But then also just not being sure how to do it, or how much of a big deal is this really going to be. I can imagine that being at the time. Like now we're probably desensitized to VAR coming in, or offside changes, tweaks to offside, or second phase play, all that sort of stuff. It maybe doesn't feel as big of a shock now, but I think a lot of teams would have been treating this as, is this really going to change anything? Who cares? And to be honest, although you do start to see it, it's probably a good half a decade away from it being something. And I think, again, we touched on this in the main event show, it's probably only when the next generation of goalkeepers come around that you see the sort of full, longer lasting impact of it. So in a way, I can't really blame clubs, managers, goalkeepers at November 1992 for not really quite knowing how it's going to be. I think we've probably got a lot of hindsight in there when we're talking about it. Sorry, Mark.
So you've got some goalkeepers are more adaptable immediately, but that's a long way from the sweeper keeper and goalkeepers who are produced to start attacks and not start attacks with a 70-yard kick.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I actually think as well, I'll maybe take it further. I think the way football is right now, and it's maybe not for this show, but I think the way football is just now, we could probably be doing with something as seismic as this. The last things are getting a lot better tactically, and there's little tweaks and things happening. But I think we all would prefer that centre halves are not getting the majority of the touches in games. Certainly for bigger teams, it would make more sense to. I've said for years that I think midfield is completely unloved now because things are moving backwards. We're trying to find space everywhere. They end up just being sort of shuttlers, probably like they were in the mid-90s, I guess, before we really started to layer in that depth that I think comes with this Cantona signing in terms of actually you can play between the lines, or there's not just three banks of three. Now we've got a little bit of variance. I think we're getting back to that a little bit with the midfield because of this insistence on defenders. Basically, what were midfielders before technically are now defenders, and I think it's all coming back. So I don't know what it is. I don't have a suggestion, but I think it needs something seismic to say we actually want to get back to having our creative players or our attacking players on the ball more than defenders. So yeah, that's something I would like to see change. But I'm not quite sure what it would be. But it's interesting, I think, how that happens. And like you said, it's super keepers are a long way away from this, but this is certainly the start.
Okay, that weekend as well, just I guess of interest, Norwich City, who I think we spoke about at the end of last week, had been battered at Ewood Park 7-1. They went to Aston Villa and won 3-2 to go back top of the league. So they're showing a bit of resilience. That resilience is going to come unstuck pretty quickly, though. Back to United, Adam, because this is whether it was going to happen anyway, whether Cantona does turbocharge that, but they go on a run following it's actually a win against Oldham the weekend before he signs. They beat Manchester City at home and they beat Norwich at home as well into December, and they go on as a fairly great run through Christmas, batter Coventry, who we'll come to later, 5-0, Spurs 4-1, a brilliant counter-attacking exhibition at Loftus Road against QPR, actually. You really are seeing what you're going to get, maybe especially the next season. Going top of the league, I think, in that week. So very much, obviously, back in the action. Cantona will be incredible. He'll score 9 league goals, Adam. Ryan Giggs will score 9 league goals and start to become, obviously, this hugely exciting young prospect. But there's an old warhorse in there as well, who, in that run, the winner against Norwich, the winner against City, the winner at Highbury, and he'll score a lot more besides that, and that's Mark Hughes. Tough as teak, but technically brilliant too. The amount of exhibition goals he scored, important goals. Obviously played it in Barcelona as well under Venables. Where does a player like that fit into this United team? And is there a Mark Hughes now, or that we've seen maybe in even the last 10, 15 years? Because he does seem to exist in the past for me. And that's not to denigrate him. He was a superb player. I'm not sure that kind of striker is still floating about.
No, I'd probably agree on that in terms of the type. Where he sits here is very, very. It's difficult not to look at this, I think, through the Cantona lens, and you almost do a disservice to others. And we talk about Cantona being the catalyst and Cantona being the first Premier League superstar, and I agree with all of that. I go back to David's quote earlier on. I do think it is still a gamble. I get that they might not think it inside, but given what we spoke about in the last episode in terms of personality, all that sort of stuff, it could have went wrong, I think. But I think they've just got this point now, class of 92 coming through. A lot of them make their debuts. Roy Keane signing the summer after this. I think it's all starting to fall into place, but I don't think they would have got to that summer without Mark Hughes. I don't think they would have won this title without Mark Hughes. That's my honest opinion. As much as you can say Cantona delivers a platform, and yes, 9 goals isn't massive compared to now for Cantona. It's what he did. It's what he did. There was just about the same amount of assists, if not more, I think. But he also pulls it all together. He becomes this, and I think this really, really helped Mark Hughes, because I agree this type of player isn't here anymore. But I think what Cantona did was what I mentioned earlier on, just dropping deep behind the attack in front of the midfield, just sort of linking things together. And it just creates confusion. You've still got those 2 midfielders for other teams behind Cantona, but the 2 midfielders in the opposition the centre halves don't know what to do. Do they drop and follow Cantona, who's gliding about? Well, if you do that, then Hughes is going to go in behind and create space, and you're 1-on-1. It sounds so simple now, but at the time, there wasn't a huge amount of it, or certainly not in the way that Cantona did. So I think Hughes for me was really, really important in that, because I'm not quite sure. We spoke about that sliding doors moment. Say, for example, they had Dion Dublin hadn't injured himself, broken his leg, and they brought Cantona in anyway. I don't know if that balance works as well for me. You kind of think in your head, Dublin being the big man, knocking it down for Cantona in that kind of way that was the style at the time, as David said earlier on. But I just don't know. I don't know. That feels a bit too obvious for me with Cantona. I don't know if that would have worked for me. Hughes sitting perfectly within the 2, shall we say? In terms of style, I think that just really helps get them over this line. The turnaround, I think, is sensational. Again, you have to point to Cantona and say he comes in, knits it all together, absolutely. But mentality, I think, for them hardens over here. Steve Bruce scoring, was it 8 goals from centre half this season? All Ince as well in there. I think there's a lot going on in there, but I do think I will double down on that without Mark Hughes in there, I'm not sure they would have got to where they got to, despite having such a good defence, despite Cantona completely revolutionising that and that great run they go on. I think they only lose 1 game between November and February, and it's to Ipswich, weirdly.
It's the Ipswich one we'll come to in a minute, but yeah, it's a combination of both, Davey. Should mention that Cantona's 9 goals come in half the league games that Hughes got his 15. I just didn't want to lose sight of the importance of Mark Hughes in this story, because understandably Cantona, the catalyst, gets the kind of focus of the narrative, and indeed Brian McClare with 9 goals as well there. A stalwart, really, I suppose, of that early Manchester United side under Ferguson. But there's no doubt that Cantona brings them more into play, that intelligence, and even that's in game. We alluded to the stuff that everybody knows about his raising the standards on a daily basis in the training ground, and people following that, and that's what these signings make. But there were more to it. There were more characters in this drama than just the main one, I think.
100%. Cantona finishes it, but that's because everything else is there. You can't have the final piece of a jigsaw if you don't have the other jigsaw pieces in place, and that's what they did. Hughes, I think, even though this is 92-93, we need to be careful not to apply the filter of now to it. Footballers were still closer to the 80s than they were to what they would be in the year 2000, even though, we are still closer to the end of the 80s. And Mark Hughes had grown up and played in the 80s. He was tough. You're absolutely right, Martin. He never stopped running. Ferguson incidentally called him the worst finisher at the club, and said he was a scorer of great goals, not a great goal scorer, which is why he starts to kind of look around. Eventually, he gets his man in Andy Cole, because he wanted a more pure finisher in that position. But Hughes had come from that era where you would get kicked and you had to kick back and you had to elbow back. But he was a very gifted player. He could hold the ball up supremely well. He was a chaser of lost causes, which, as Ferguson noted, that can be useful in British football. Foreign players will look on it askance and say, why are you chasing that ball? It's going out. And Ferguson said, because it'll get the crowd up. And if that gets the crowd up, that'll get everybody else going. I'm glad Adam mentioned Ince, who I think because when he got older, he became cartoonish, the self-given nickname, the governor, and, nonsense like that. But he was a terrific midfielder and a modern midfielder, someone who he goes to Italy and plays, of course, very, very well for 2 years in Inter at a time when you had the most technical league in the world, and he goes and fits in there very, very well indeed. He was disciplined in that side, and that gave the exciting players that they had, for example, Giggs, for example, Sharp, who had lightning pace. And the thing I remember, you mentioned there that counter-attacking, the thing I remember most about that United team was when I go back and I watch these clips, it's that lightning, it's 4 passes. It literally is, from defence to midfield, wide and into the middle, and it's a goal. They were thrilling the way that they could move. And it was because the balance was excellent in this side. When Cantona comes in, he infuses them with attitude, but he also plays very well with others. As I'm sure you two like to hear about your kids from their nursery teachers, but he did, and he was clever enough to say, right, okay, this is how Hughes likes the ball delivered. These are the positions that I take up, and he didn't tread on their toes. I'm with Adam. I don't see Dublin and Hughes as a title-winning duo. I find them quite similar, with Dublin being a slightly lesser version of Hughes, because Hughes was a target man. You could play Mark Hughes. Wales did it spectacular. I remember with Mark Hughes and Ian Rush, and it was Hughes who was the target man and Rush who was the electrics, pacey striker who got in on the last man's shoulder. To me, playing both of them together would have been slightly too much. And Hughes was more intelligent as a footballer, and that's not in any way discussing them off the field or anything, so please don't take it as a dig. I'm talking purely football intelligence. Hughes was more intelligent than Dublin. Dublin was less subtle, was more brushstrokes, or bigger brushstrokes. So I don't think he fits with Cantona as well. But there was a lot in that side. Bruce, a leader. The captain, a leader. Gary Pallister, really elegant centre-back. He really was. Again, because it's the 90s, they're all physical. When we speak about physicality, they all had to have it to some degree. But Pallister was a really elegant defender, Martin. He read the game superbly well. Dennis Irwin, Mr. Consistency for them. you can only be the final piece of the jigsaw if the other pieces are already down, and they were.
That's United. We will pick them up at the very end of this week's show, and probably a fair bit next week. We'll take a little break. That means the Sting's coming. Turn your car radio down. Welcome back. So that's Manchester United kind of taken care of for this winter, early spring that we're looking at. Quick word on Norwich, David. They had responded to that Blackburn win, and then they lost to United, and then they lost at home to Ipswich in the old farm,
painful one,
and all of that. Yeah. And that's when they really do then fall out the way of this. But it's worth noting that around that time Ipswich were 5th. There's so many of these maybe unfancied sides really doing damage, and then they fall off a cliff. They beat Blackburn Rovers, with whom or about whom we'll speak about soon. But they were a handy outfit as well. Again, kind of blending John Wark and that experience. We're talking about players who make this thing about the Premier League in those first couple of seasons as the first division with, new marketing. Mickey Quinn does not look like a Premier League footballer, for example. We'll talk about Coventry in a minute. Ian Marshall looks like something out of Motorhead that's been allowed to play Premier League football. But, they have something about them. And one of the exciting talents kind of lost the time who scored at Carrow Road was Chris Kawomia.
Yeah,
and
Chris Kawomia.
Ipswich had something about them as well.
Ipswich did. They had a few players, Jason Dessel, who, of course, probably better known from his days at Spurs, but they had some quality players in there. Do you remember Boncho Genchev, Martin, the Bulgarian?
Indeed.
What a great name, Boncho Genchev. But I'll be honest, if you had said to me before we went back and started looking at this, was John Wark a Premier League player? I would have said no, because my memories of John Wark are mid-80s, Ipswich to Liverpool. But there he is, he's back, your spiritual home captain, and you're still very effective. Now, he is your rampaging 80s midfielder, isn't he? Writ large. But they had Paul Goddard as well. He was a very clever forward. I always liked Paul Goddard. People won't remember him for his time at West Ham and Derby. And he's coming to the end of his career here. But he was clever. He didn't have pace. He was a target man, but he wasn't quick. But he knew, if you put legs with him, Chris Kawomia, he was the old head on the part. And they are a nice mix of experience. But also, John Wark, his medal collection is pretty full at this point. The old show me your medals thing. I'm not sure many teams now can get a hold of a player with his achievement. A team like Ipswich would struggle to get that because they would have higher options up the ladder. I mean, he'd won the UEFA Cup with Ipswich. Then at Liverpool, he'd won everything, including the European Cup before the ban. So what he brought to the side was that sort of real athleticism, because he was a machine. It was just totally up and down the park, but he could finish, Martin. He really could. To me, he was the this is going to sound a strange comparison, and you'll understand what I mean by it. He had that ability to get into the box in the way that Frank Lampard had, and he could finish in the way that Frank Lampard had. The difference is Lampard drove into the box in his Lamborghini, and John Wark was going in on a tank. Right. And it was just, anything in my path is going to be cleared sort of thing. But they were a lovely mix of youth and experience. And you're only 10 years removed from Ipswich. Should have won the league the year Villa won it. Ipswich should have won it. They blew it late on. They'd won the UEFA Cup. It's not unimaginable that they can go and do. It's in the common memory still. It's a wee while, but, think about it now. I mean, 10 years is not all that long. But that was a big win over Norwich. And again, I have more quotes for you. I do research for this show, just in case listeners think we don't. Chris Sutton, for it is he says, you have to remember at Norwich, we were a selling club and we didn't really have ambitions in terms of being in the top half of the table. I remember when we got to 30 points that season, we all went, great, we're not getting relegated. And that, in a way, you mentioned there about going off the boil and recovering. You can do that at Norwich if you're not completely dragged into a relegation race. If you're not sitting there in a relegation race where the pressure mounts and the fans are worried. But if you're above that for most of it and you're winning, more regularly than you expected to, you can lose 2 or 3. Adam and I, on our Italian football show, we talk about Atalanta as a great modern equivalent, because Atalanta can go 3 or 4 games where they win and then they'll get hammered 5 or 6. And their fans are fine with that because they're Atalanta. And Ipswich benefit from that. Norwich benefit from that. The expectation level is not what it would be. They've been 18th the year before. Their fans are fully expecting another relegation battle. Anything that is not the terror and the constant debilitating worry of a relegation battle feels great. So they can go, do you know what, lads? We've had a bad couple of weeks. Let's get ourselves together again. If we've got a couple of players out through injury, I think they missed David Phillips for a couple of weeks and he was such an important creative member of that side, then you get him back. The further up the ladder you go, or the longer you spend at the top, then expectations change. And I think recently, we recorded this in 2025, Nottingham Forest last season are a great example of that. Because the year before, the fans were fully expecting a relegation battle, became clear early on they weren't going to get it. But then for so long that they were on the verge of Champions League qualification, to not get Champions League qualification became disappointing, which is laughable when you think about the expectation at the start of the season. And that's the kind of thing that happens to Norwich this season, I think.
Fair enough. Can we touch on Merseyside for a brief moment? Everton beat Liverpool in December, 2-1. Liverpool had gone ahead, and then Maurice Johnson had equalised, and I think Peter Beardsley had got the winner. Fair bit of chat at that time that Everton, might go down. It's going to be a fair bit of chat for a wee while, certainly next season, in the Great Escape. But that was quite a big moment for them. By the February, Liverpool and all sorts of nonsense. I think Coventry had slapped them 5-1. They went to Southampton and lost 2-1. Genuine chat, Adam, that they could get dragged into an unthinkable kind of relegation, quasi-relegation kind of situation. It really is all going tits up. A lot of those chickens that we talked about on the summer show about Liverpool and their signings really coming home to roost. Dean Saunders having a great old time. We'll touch on Villa at the end of this show. Fair to say that Ronnie Rosenthal is not really filling that gap, that famous miss early on in the season. Against Villa, I think, at Villa Park, where he had the entire goal in front of him, and he contrived to hit the bar. If it's going to go wrong for Liverpool this season, it's going to go wrong, it would appear.
Yeah, 2 things that I find quite amusing before I start here is there's a player David didn't mention from Ipswich called Frank Yallop, who scored an incredible goal, I think, United, and I think I've seen someone calling him Frank Wallop after that, which I really enjoyed. And there's another one here. I have never said this, I've never heard this name said out loud, but I'm going to assume it's the pronunciation as you would expect it, but Nicky Banger.
Yes, Nicky, I think they went Banger. I'm sorry to disappoint you.
I thought they might do, but
it's Banger. It is Banger. You're right. He was wrong. He was at it. He knew.
Well, he scores a banger. He scores a Banger for that against Liverpool. Letizia too, scoring absolute peaches, as we know.
That's less of a shock.
It is less of a shock. Yeah, I want to come on to that. I'll maybe leave it a little bit until the end, but I want to come on to the number of long range goals. I've had a bit of a look, and I've got a bit of a theory about it that I want to check with you guys. But Yeah, I think Liverpool lots and lots of trouble at this point. Everton obviously as well. I think just one place above relegation they finish, but Souness obviously under loads of pressure. They do rally and come back into it. It is strange. We spoke about it on the prologue show about how that great Liverpool team maybe just got a little bit stale over the spell that they weren't in Europe. We know now how important Europe is in terms of the elite and making sure you're up there and all these sorts of things. So yeah, I think once you get into that tailspin, it wasn't going well for Souness, really, as we know. They do turn it around, Martin, like you said, but I think certainly by February, they're closer to relegation than they are the title, which would obviously be a huge shock given where they've been. Credit to them for rallying, I guess, and finishing as high up the league as they did, albeit I don't know. You could say it's not a great league. Is that fair in terms of some of the teams that we've seen at the top that are shocks? Normally, when you hear that type of thing, you think, "Where is this team? Where is that team?" But still, for them to rally, I think in that way and get back up there, I think they probably deserve huge credit. But yeah, it just wasn't really working out for either club this season.
No, and it wouldn't for either club for some time, but we'll get to that in due course. Going to go to Boxing Day next, chaps, and to Ewood Park. Blackburn Rovers against Leeds United. Blackburn win 3-1 in the end. Alan Shearer, of course, with 2. After his first goal, he's involved in coming together with John Lukic, I think, the aforementioned, and certainly the Leeds United goalkeeper. And is in pain. Physio comes, moves the right knee back and forward a wee bit, but Shearer plays on. This is in the first half, by the way, I think. Plays on, plays the full 90 minutes, scores again in the second half. And then they have to look at the injury and it's ligaments, and he's out for the rest of the season. There's a tantalising what if. I guess that what happens to Blackburn's season if this machine, and he was a machine up to that point, continues without stopping. Could they do what Norwich couldn't do ultimately, which is sustain a challenge? Could even go a bit further than Villa eventually were able to. It's tantalising, David, but I think it's probably slightly misguided. I think that Leeds game was Blackburn's 21st of the season league game, and they had 37 points, 21 after that, 34 points. So there's not much in it. They were starting to lose games before then. They lost at Anfield. Kenny Dalglish's return, of course. They lost at Borough. No one was really losing too many games against Middlesbrough. So it probably was coming to an end. It was 5 games in October, November without a win. This is a thing. How many these teams that are flitting about here, they're all going through these massive spells without a win. And still finishing kind of decent return. But that's not to say surely Blackburn get more than 34 points of the remaining 21 games with Shearer there. But maybe just as a team they were maybe just hitting a corner anyway.
Yeah, I think momentum when you're a promoted side is massive if you can harness it. And although they were much more ambitious and much better set and had much better players than a lot of promoted teams, I do think it's absolutely fair to say that that momentum, that positive momentum, had begun to run out. Because I've seen this, Martin, from football revisionists have said, "Oh, if Shearer doesn't get injured," and it doesn't take into account exactly the point you made, which is they're already losing with him in the team. If he had stayed fit and they'd been a bit further, I'm not saying it could have ended in a title push, but would they have? They had the ability to go and spend though. And maybe push, a bit higher up. So maybe it changes their ambitions and their outlooks, but then you're asking a lot of things to happen, and they get the right guy, and he hits the ground running, and it's a lot to suggest. I'm kind of with you. I think that we like nice, clean turning points. Blackburn are going to have a league challenge right up until Alan Shearer gets his injury. But if you actually look, that is just something that, if you like, acts as a big highlighting of something that was happening where they were losing. I think that they do better, absolutely. But again, who knows if Shearer, if he has a spell where he goes 3 or 4 games and the goals dry up and his confidence goes. It would have been interesting to see what the investment would have been like come March, come the deadline day, had they had a bit more to play for. But I agree with you. I think that the early excitement and momentum, and it's not coincidence when this happens. It happens in the sludgy time. And another thing to bear in mind, and I do urge listeners or viewers to go back and watch some of the footage from this, even just go back and watch Premiership years. Watch the pitches at this point. These are not the pitches we are used to now. These are absolute mud baths, awful pitches, as Martin says. They are strength sapping. They are taking it out of you. And it's no surprise that in winter, that kind of, wait, it's the Premier League, this is amazing, goes, and it's like, now you need to slog at places like Middlesbrough and pick up wins, and they can't. So, no, I agree with you. I think that the, not rot had set in, but certainly maybe the steam had come off the latte at that point.
The only thing
they get a European place, Adam, right? Because Norwich pipped them for the European spot, the final European spot in the end. They get that, right? They would still be in that kind of top 3 conversation.
Yeah, the only thing I agree with both what you're saying. It'd be lovely if there's this sliding doors moment within a few weeks of Cantona coming in and Shearer going out, and that's the story. But I agree, they actually scored more goals when Shearer got injured. So,
Adam, it's the old Haaland debate again, isn't it? It's, are you better having the one guy who gets loads of goals or sharing it around the team? And it's still a debate now.
Yeah, the only other thing, and you can't really prove this one because it depends on context, etc., is psychologically, maybe for the squad, for the opposition, all those type of things. They are starting to lose. They've got the second best record, I think, in terms of goals conceded when he finishes up. I think it's just behind Man United. I don't have the numbers to hand, but I think it's they're second in terms of goals, least amount of goals conceded. But that starts to ramp up as well. Now, that's not Shearer's fault, obviously, and it wouldn't really be his fault that they concede more. But I think it is just a combination of everything that you've said. There's also probably the psychological aspect. We've spoke now about 5 goals off the top of my head that Shearer's scored the opening goal. There'll probably be many more. There's maybe the psychological aspect there of when they get in front, they did a better job when Shearer was there of keeping the back door secured. Maybe they start to lose more goals early, and maybe they don't have that guy up there who can occupy. They've got players up there that can occupy, of course they do. But Shearer occupying defenders is different to
anyone else,
for example. So I don't think, when you look at it literally, I don't think it's something that you could say if Shearer was fit, Blackburn would have won the title. But I think there's going to be a little bit more nuance to it than that. It would have been great, I think, to see his record. The record post his injury sort of speaks for itself. I think it's only 7 wins in 20 something games, 7 wins in 20 maybe. But yeah, I don't think we're talking about a genuine title contender piece. But to your point, Martin, I absolutely think a slot or 2 higher would have been achievable. And we'll never know that aspect of it.
And I wonder who they could have attracted in the summer with European football. But we'll come to that story in due course. Okay, another break. Do we need to do? Speak soon. Welcome back. A couple of stories to touch on before we wrap up for this third part of 92-93. And speaking about clubs who look to be doing well and then just had these massive runs without a win, and seemingly, out of nowhere, they're completely out of the picture. Coventry, Davey, are a team like that. They get some big wins, They're 8th at New Year. And there was a bit of excitement in that start of the season, or that first half of the season, and then they just absolutely plummet. End the season in 15th. But Bobby Gould, that colourful character manager, Mickey Quinn, the aforementioned, up front. Premier League football's just do not have that physique anymore. I think it's fair to say.
No.
But at times, a bit of love for Coventry, or should I say, a bit of unlove for Coventry, because again, nice. Peter and Liv just had there was something exciting about him as well, and there are quite a few of these players we talked about. Chris Kawamia earlier, Real Fox last week. Outside of the bigger sides, that I do recall watching on, being very interested by, very invested in, and those careers just didn't quite completely come to the promise that a lot of us assumed maybe.
No, Peter and Love was a funny one, because the big move eluded him, didn't it? The one that you kind of need to take at a certain point in your career, but there was talk of Arsenal, I remember, mid-90s, and it never materialised, and then some of the steam just goes out of the career. In terms of this Coventry season, on Boxing Day, they annihilate Aston Villa 3-0, and it's 3 going on 7. And that Villa defence was good, Martin. Paul McGrath, etc. That was a good defence. Mickey Quinn batters them, and I use the word batter advisedly. It's a proper... It's a Drogba, that's what it is. They play the ball up to him quickly, and he terrorises their defence, and they hammer a very good Villa side, and everybody knew it was a very good Villa side, and people do begin to go, here, there's something going on there. How often have we said this on our various shows? Once people notice you, the pressure is different, and the atmosphere is different. Coventry are just Coventrying away the first 6 months of this season. Nobody's paying them much attention because they're Coventry. And at this point, they are kind of, for modern listeners, they were Bournemouth or Brighton. They're a respected, mid-table side. They're not going to be troubling the scorers. They shouldn't be in relegation bother. They're a bit dull, the Midlands, the reputation, the accents, etc., that people mock. But by Christmas, people have woken up to them. And then what happens? They're in the glare. They immediately stop. And 1 defeat begets 2 defeat begets a bad month. And suddenly the momentum, which had all been going one way up till Christmas, goes the other. And it is, I think, I'd be really interested to get your thoughts on this. I sometimes wonder if that's actually more difficult to turn around because you are completely safe. That there isn't the fear of a side who go on a bad run, say March, who know, we better arrest this or we are going down. I think it can be slightly more difficult. And so often it seems to kick into the following season. It's almost like we have the phrase for it, don't we? They're on the beach. And it is almost like, well, we know we had dreamt of being 5th, but we're now not going to get that. Equally, we're not going to go down. So, it's all about next season now. And I don't think you can do that because, as we've said time after time, football doesn't stop and just completely reset in the summer, and moods and form and everything seem to carry on. And I think Coventry are guilty of that. I think they're guilty of when they come into people's attention, they begin to falter in the glare of expectation. However, also after that Villa game, people maybe take you a bit differently they have before, because that was, it was on TV and it was highlighted and people were discussing it and Quinn's performance. And then suddenly, rather than maybe managers, it's only Coventry, or players thinking that now this is going to be difficult, this is a big game, this is tough, and that can affect you as well. But a season of 2 halves, absolutely.
Yeah, that win against Villa, was a stunner. But let's chat about Villa then, Adam, because they are going to bounce back from that. I think it's fair to say. They go on a fairly decent run themselves in the new year. I think there's maybe only 2 defeats in about 12, 13 games. They will be top, them and Manchester United, by the time we get to February, kind of sharing that lead, or handing it over to one another, and games in hand being a bit of an issue as well. But there's just such solidity around that team. I'm looking at the Premier League appearances here. Dwight York's even making 27. Dwight was fairly young at the time, especially when you've got Dalian Atkinson and Dean Saunders as the kind of nominal front two, and working very well. Old hands like Gary Parker, Sean Teal, Kevin Richardson in the high 30s and 40s. Ray Houghton coming to the end of his career, 39 league games. Steve Staunton, 42. Errol Barrett, 42. And the other player with the full house, I guess, for the Premier League is Paul McGrath. A player that was touted, David, has probably been for the scrap heap soon because of injuries, lifestyle. In this comeback story, and we all love a bit of this kind of renaissance. It's going to keep going to the World Cup in '94, that kind of famous assessment of his performance against Italy in the Giant Stadium, that water covers 60% of the earth, and the other 40% it was Paul McGrath. As someone who, again, wasn't really around at the time in terms of consuming this the way that you would shortly, what does he mean to you, his performance that season, looking back? Because he will win one of the Player of the Year awards for sure. And I wonder if that is not just recognition of this consistent and very high-class performance, but that third act, and that people wanted to see it and were worried they would never see it, and it was good to see.
Yeah, so I watched a couple of Villa games earlier this week, and just on them themselves, I think, again, the story of this is absolutely Cantona joining and United going on this run, but there's a bit here for Villa for me that I think they might feel, they do feel that they could have won this. And again, it probably does come down to a striker. I think Ron Atkinson said himself that if Dalian Atkinson didn't get injured, he picked up a muscle injury and it kept him out for 3 months, I think he said. But if he said he hadn't got injured, I think we'd have won the league, because Atkinson and Saunders were the best strike force in the league. And I don't disagree. One of the games I watched was a goal. Dean Saunders lobs the keeper from about 35 yards out, and it's just an incredible finish. And I think we touched on their squad as well at this point. They've got a nice mix. They've got Mark Bosnich, Stefan Beinlich, Dwight York, Hugo Ehog, all coming through, but they've supplemented with Saunders, we mentioned, Dalian Atkinson coming in this time, Paul McGrath, who will come on to, Steve Staunton is there, Ray Houghton, you mentioned as well. It just works, I think, as a group, and I think they'll think themselves really that this is a missed opportunity here, because it was, I think, there was a game, I can't remember what game it was, but there was obviously Man United fans with the Ron Atkinson thing were singing a less than complimentary song about him, and inquiring if his bottle had gone, which I quite enjoyed. So yeah, I think they'll feel like they missed this. They had their opportunities, which we'll come on to, obviously, as the run in comes. But yeah, I think it's a really good team, and I think it's one that, like I said, probably deserves a little bit more. Onto McGrath then himself, definitely one that I was aware of for sure. PFA players Player of the Year, I think, in '93 this season, obviously, which I think sums it up. The obvious comparison, I guess, is Ledley King in the sense that couldn't train, but was more than happy to put in insane performances at the weekend, despite barely being able to walk throughout the week. Obviously, had a really hard upbringing as well. Paul McGrath, there's lots there around. Being born in London, but then having to go back to Dublin and orphanages and foster homes and all that sort of stuff. Interesting. I hadn't realised that it was with St Patrick's Athletic that he got his start, I guess, or his one of his clubs in Ireland, and obviously they've got that link with Man United as well. So I hadn't quite figured that was where it came on the radar. But yeah, like I said, he obviously had his problems, and I think it is one of those things we maybe, being a good player and playing for a big club, I think we can conflate the two things sometimes, and I think we think the be all and end all is the be all and end all is being a very good player who performs at one of the biggest clubs in the world and going on and being the best ever. But just just because you can't and you fail in inverted commas, and I know there's varying reasons for maybe why things didn't work at Man United. I don't think taking a step down should be seen as a sort of negative in the way that it does. Example right now, I think of Jack Grealish, and people are surprised that Jack Grealish is a good footballer because he's playing for Everton. Just because something doesn't work out at a certain level doesn't mean you get tossed on the scrap heap. And I think Paul McGrath is a great example here. I don't know what the feeling was at the time. You guys can maybe tell me. He's obviously not at this time going from a Man United to someone at the bottom of the league. Aston Villa are still a very, very good team at this point. But I would have thought there might have been a bit of a situation where he was taking or I thought that he was sort of taking a step down. Fair play to him. Obviously, all those issues going on, the knee injuries, strained relationships he had, the drinking culture at Man United at that time. It's probably his time to move on. But what a fantastic player! I mean, to go on and get over 300 appearances for them. Yes, I think for the story, it'd be fantastic if Villa had won a title, as any team like that would do. But I think for them to go on and get those two cups for him sort of cements his place, I think, for them. So yeah, I think he was a terrific player. Again, it's so easy to say a player that could play now, but I genuinely think that. I genuinely think we don't want it to be a cliche, but he just had everything. I think looking at the two Man United centre halves this season, as good as they are, I think Paul McGrath is better than them in terms of the season that he gives out. And yeah, credit to him. Like I said, I do think it would have been really, really interesting to see them go the distance in this league, and what could have happened there in terms of further down the line. But yeah, take nothing away from him. I thought he was fantastic, and this season he's just terrific. Yeah,
this is a great example of how where it's great for us to be able to remember that Alex Ferguson here is not Alex Ferguson, behemoth of English football that he becomes at this point. So when he got rid of Paul McGrath, there were a lot of people questioning it, because Ferguson has subsequently spoken, and we know, unfortunately, about Paul McGrath's off-field troubles with alcoholism. But Ferguson was breaking up the drinking club. He gets rid of Norman Whiteside. He gets rid, as he said in his book, the problem that he had at United was Robson could drink like a fish and go in and train and not affect his training or his performances. The other lads who tried to keep up with him couldn't. But he couldn't sell Brian Robson because he was far too important to the club. So he had to get rid of the players. When McGrath went to Villa, there was a lot of people saying what a great move this is for Villa because he was rated. And also, it's interestingly how history repeats. There was a kind of thing, Adam, about this point of players who get out of Man United go on and do well because it might not always be the player, it's the environment, it's the club. And there had been a lot of good players going into that United machine in the 80s being swallowed up and spat out. And the parallels at the moment where United in the 80s, they had Brian Robson. He was their Bruno Fernandes. He was their leading light. And a lot of good players who came in and had moments but weren't consistent, then left and were brilliant elsewhere and hugely successful elsewhere. And United had this at this point. So, yeah, it wasn't a case, I think, of people seeing him taking a step down so much as people thinking Villa had done really, really well to get him and that maybe Ferguson had dropped a bollock with this one. And in all fairness, his performances didn't do much to take away the idea that it maybe been an error. But of course, Ferguson had Pallister and he had Bruce, and that was a really formidable defence. But you mentioned there about playing at the moment. McGrath could, because he wasn't quick as in lightning. He wasn't Des Walker, but he was quick enough. And his positional sense, I would honestly place Paul McGrath's positional sense up there with Van Dijk. He knew where to be at any given point. His decision making, something we don't talk a lot about for a defender, his decision making was superb. And in 1-to-1s, he was virtually unbeatable. You were not getting past him. A terrific defender. And what he did this season in particular, he was a rock and fully deserved his places in the end of year polls.
Absolutely. We love that story. Adam, I was intrigued with your observation about long range goals earlier, or you wish to make or develop that observation. Something I've noticed before, certainly looking at early 80s stuff with Ness and Dormer, and it's just Alan Partridge reels all over the place. Just a kind of shit. Did you see that? I mean, people are just pinging them from everywhere. I'm not entirely sure we get that these days, where teams are trying to create chances from about 6 yards, and if they can't, they'll go back to the centre halves and try that again. Were you enjoying the pingers all over the place in 92-93?
I was. I mean, there's some incredible goals. We mentioned some of them earlier in earlier shows, and we mentioned a couple there. But I am taken by just how many there are. I am someone who, when I go back and look at some of these games, I think they made the defending, and no one talks about it at all. And it's all about what the attacker did, and that was great. I think things have been ruined now with too much analysis, and when we think too much about these things, and we're too aware of defence and position and all that sort of stuff that maybe we weren't in the past. So yeah, I think there's maybe a little bit of that, but I do agree as well on the long range efforts. I think it's maybe just a culture thing. There wasn't as much of a fear back then of wasting possession. I think more managers probably would favour that. It was a speculative shot, would be absolutely fine. Ray Houghton, John Wortley was mentioned. Have a go, see what happens. The pitches, I think, was something that you guys mentioned as well, and I think that probably helps. Helps.
So the percentages then, Adam, the percentages are have a dig rather than try and play triangles through a potato field in the middle of January.
You know, hit a divot in front of the keeper. Don't have a dig and try and pass it 5 yards to your teammate, and it might hit a divot because the pitch is an absolute riot and you lose possession anyway. I think those things make it more of an even playing field. I also think as well, this is something that maybe doesn't seem that much, but remember the Jabulani ball in South Africa? We're now getting into this stage where evolution of things, there's a big jump, I think, in the early mid-90s with the Premier League ball as well. It's a little bit lighter than the balls in the 80s, I'm sure. So there's an aspect there as well. I think being caught, have a dig, this ball's lighter, see what happens. I remember some of those from South Africa. That'll be the same back then as well. I also think as well, I've been taken by the amount of space.
Yeah, they're not as fit. And I mean that, I don't mean, all sports get quicker. That world records, get reduced. Players, and also things like Adam, forwards pressing was rarer.
Exactly.
So there was more space. Yeah, there absolutely was. And now you go, how many shots do you see that get blocked straight away because there's someone within a yard of you. There is room to have these, you're absolutely spot on there. And it's not to knock these people or say that they weren't fit. Of course they were. It's just in sport and life, evolution, we get quicker, the games get quicker, all sports get quicker, and this was an example of it. So there's more space to try that.
And even, I guess, if you think about it literally as well, 4-4-2s, lots of space between the lines, as we've said, that's going to come in and start to fill those things. You flip that around and you've got a back four who aren't going to press the midfielders too much. So midfielders are going to have 20, 30 yards of distance to run into. There's no defensive midfielders to take care of them. So once you get past your man, you've got 20, 30 yards to go into. Why would you not have a pop? Your manager's telling you to, there's space there, all that sort of stuff. So I think that is probably all part of the reason. That being said, there was one goal that I wanted to highlight from this period, and it's Cantona's assist for that Dennis Irwin goal. Deary me. I don't know what the golf terminology is. I'm going to say a 7 iron. I don't know, whatever it is. It is like a wee lob over the defence, and Irwin just batters it in the goal. That to me sums up the sort of changing of the guard here, where you've got Cantona putting those passes in that nobody's doing from those areas of the pitch a year or two before, and then you've got Dennis Irwin breaking the offside trap, as ridiculous as that sounds, and smashing a goal in. So I think that's probably my favourite goal in terms of what I like to see from football. But some of those goals, and it does seem to be concentrated in this sort of festive period into January, February. There's some absolute belters in there, and I think that what we've just discussed there may be a little bit of a reason why. For
sure. Also, Jason Cundy's for Spurs Ipswich, one of the first Supers. We talked about long range goals. I mean, that speculative is one word, but there we are. End of February then. Dear old Nottingham Forest, despite winning that first ever Super Sunday game, are at the bottom of the league. Borough down there, Palace are down there, and Oldham Athletic looking in big bother as well. More about them next week. At the top is Aston Villa, 2 points clear of Manchester United, but United have a game in hand, and March will see them play at Old Trafford, billed as a title decider. Maybe not quite, but there are twists and turns and Fergie time and all sorts of carry on to come next week as the first Premier League title is settled. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, listeners, viewers. You can find us on all the social pipes, I'm sure. Until next time, bye for now.